Hello, I'm Eric Holdeman, and welcome to Disaster Zone, a show about emergencies and disasters that can happen anywhere and at any time. Today, wildfires are ripping through the West and sending suffocating smoke into our communities. It has given all of us a taste of natural disasters. But fortunately, firefighters have some new weapons, drones, and that's not the only way. Drones are becoming a valuable tool in emergency management. Today we're talking with Charlton Evans with End State Solutions, which does a lot of work with drones, and I call Charlton a drone expert. So welcome, Charlton, to the Disaster Zone.
Thank you very much, Eric. Great to be here.
And about a year ago, I was at the University of Washington doing a presentation on technology, and I was going to touch on drones, and I asked for a show of hands, who in the audience thought that drones were evil? And a few people raised their hands. So that's the first question, Charlton. Are drones evil?
Right. So I think when people perceive things as evil, it's typically because there's some sort of fear, right? Yeah. And people fear things that they don't completely understand. It's just our nature as humans. Yeah. So as people become more understanding of, and there's more knowledge generally about how drones can be of benefit, there'll be less fear and people will perceive them as less evil. Okay. So people fear things like invasion of privacy and autonomy in some cases and all the things that are emerging because this industry has made so much progress in recent years.
What's the primary benefit you see from drones in disaster response and disaster recovery? There's a lot of other things, but hopefully I'll get my Amazon package delivered to my front door or back door or on the roof from a drone. Right. But in emergency management and disasters, what do you see as the primary benefits coming from drones?
So there are really three. Drones are fantastic at collecting data, and data that may be hard to get otherwise, dangerous to get otherwise, and they're good at recording it as well. So using that to benefit, whether it be over a fire or a flood, et cetera, there's a lot of information that responders need to effectively respond. The other thing they can really do is get up in the air and create a communications link, which in big disasters is a big deal because communications typically go down. But if you can put a flying cell tower up overhead, then your communications are reestablished and the recovery goes all the quicker. Recently, we've seen a third application, and it is delivery, and it's the delivery of incendiaries to actually help fight the fires. So those are three really beneficial and major scale applications that come to mind.
You talk about drones being used for telecommunications, cellular. Instead of have a ground, they call it a cow, cell tower on wheels. You can put it in the air and actually just have it tethered. So Absolutely. It's up there buzzing, and it's at a fairly high extreme height, so it has broader coverage.
Good coverage.
That's a terrific example of it. And what about, you talk about data. I think that's another fear factor that comes with all of this is, you have a video image. A lot of people think it only is video, but we'll talk more about sensors later, perhaps. But what about the data, the storage of it, the keeping of it, the destruction of it?
Right. So privacy is the issue, right? Nobody wants their privacy invaded, and that's universally accepted, and the industry has standards to prevent that. The fear is the bad actors who don't necessarily adhere to industry standards or understand what they're doing. Drones don't have any magical or mysterious science fiction-like payloads that can see through the walls of your house or really get invasive in that way. However, if it's in the public view and there's a bona fide reason to film it, much like helicopters or any other manned aircraft can do, then it is eligible to be filmed, and that's legal. However, for example, if you lived on a busy street and people were driving by and walking by and you were sitting on your porch, maybe you know some of those people, maybe you don't. If folks come by and you wave and say hello, that's one thing. If somebody walks by and they're taking pictures of you sitting on your porch in a very specific way, you might be curious about that because people just don't normally do that. Doesn't mean it's illegal, but it's just not normal. And you might ask that guy or gal what they're doing. And that's the kind of, I think, fear or concern that arises. These tools, if they're misused, could be put in the air in places where people don't want to show everything about their lives. So there are regulations in place both to control where drones fly and also people who are genuinely collecting data for benefit and legitimate purposes have to control that data in very specific ways under federal regulations, under local, state regulations. There are laws in place.
Okay. And you talk about data collection like that. I remember being in my front yard and Google had their vehicle going through doing the street view mapping aspect. And people are used to that. Perhaps almost everyone has computers looked up their address and they can see it from above, but you can also see it from the street view. And we've come to accept that level of technology.
And that went through a couple of iterations where you could opt out. Maybe you still can, I'm not aware, but you could have, they don't show license plates, they protect personal information.
Right. This is probably 15 years ago here in King County, the 911 office for King County actually paid to have every address in King County digitally mapped. So they had a vehicle come in front of every building, every house, every apartment, and establish a grid coordinate for that place because of cellular phones starting to be used more, and that's the identification for it. So.
And we trust in that agency. It's a public agency that is doing that for the benefit of the public to better respond to emergencies. It's the mistrust of the bad actor or somebody who doesn't understand how to manage data that's the fear.
Look at the automobile. It can be a car bomb. They're used in bank robberies. They're used as a physical weapon to run down people. Yet look at all the positive benefits we have every day. And it's just a new technology, drones, sometimes called unmanned aerial systems, unmanned aerial vehicles, UAS, UAV, and we're trying to be acronym free here. But we'll call it drones for now. But you know, they have tremendous capability and they will be used, unfortunately, in a negative way also.
And I think it'll be such a small minority of negative utilization that we'll see that people, fear over time will diminish.
So let's talk about the sensors. I mean, it isn't, typically we think about just the camera. I mean, it's the camera view, that's what people are used to. But what other types of sensors can be put on a drone?
So remote sensing is what we call in the industry what is occurring. And that can occur, like you said, with just an electro-optical camera or an infrared camera, night vision, LiDAR, which is a laser, basically a radar, but you use a laser, and it can paint a very detailed picture of what you're trying to inspect or look at. You've also got multispectral cameras, which use various spectrums to see differently than we can with our naked eye. And you've got hyperspectral, which expands those bands significantly, so you can do some really interesting work in, say, agriculture and find out what's going on the ground in terms of humidity, water, insect infestation, all sorts of different ways to see the world that we can't with our naked eye. And because those things are mounted on the aerial vehicle, we plummet back to the ground, and you can either see it in real time if that's a need, or you record it all and then go and do the analysis on it. So if I go and fly around my naked eye, I have a memory of what I saw. Maybe it's a good memory, maybe it's not so accurate, but when you record it and can analyze it, then you have useful data to that customer.
Okay, and you know, I know in agriculture, drones are being used quite a bit today, and one example you kind of alluded to is farmers are flying over their fields and find out where they need water.
Yes.
And they're only watering that portion of the field, so they're conserving. So
or
pesticides.
So precision agriculture, whether you do it from the ground or detect from the air, you're limiting the amount of pesticide you put on, you limit the amount of fertilizer, you put it where you need it, and water, which is a huge consumption issue.
You've had some experience. You're also a former naval aviator.
Correct.
Yes. You flew off of aircraft carriers.
I did, yes.
And what type of aircraft was that?
So I was a Harrier pilot and went through the naval aviation pipeline, and then selected Harriers in the Marine Corps. So we did the carrier stuff while I was a student naval aviator, and then flew off ships on the Harrier vertically. So we stopped and then landed versus trying to catch the wire.
Okay. All right. The tail hook.
Yeah, right.
Whatever. Did Harriers still have tail hooks or no?
No, we rely completely on the motor to land the airplane. So.
Okay, all right, very good. A helicopter like landing without the blades.
Indeed, with less moving parts.
Right. So what about your experience with disaster response? What have you seen? We talked some about fires early on, and you've had some.
Yeah, I was privileged to be involved with several fires last year and run Scan Eagle systems on behalf of In Situ. We did the first beyond visual line of sight work for the Eagle Creek fire, flying Scan Eagles between Portland and Hood River, all up and down the Columbia River Gorge, mapping that fire, and particularly mapping it at night. Prior to that, we'd done a demonstration in the Olympic Mountains on a fire that was very remote up there for Department of Interior. And that set the stage for us being integrated into their operations in a more formal and effective way during an actual response. Okay. So the key was nighttime. They couldn't get eyes on at night. We were able to not only map the fire, but also look at very specific places where there were spot fires, find spot fires they weren't aware of, find out how the fire was moving, and look at key infrastructure that they were worried about being destroyed. So there was that fire. Mendocino Valley fires that year as well, which have gone again this year.
Okay, and that's California.
Correct, in California. And they're also on the Taylor fire this year. So that was the fire context. That's going to be a huge growing industry. DOI has contracts out now for drones. And we also did the disaster response post-Harvey.
DOI.
I'm sorry, you're right. Department of Interior has issued a call when needed contract for drones to work on fires specifically.
Okay. And you know, the U.S. Forest Service has been a real technological leader. When I look at agencies who started adopting social media and putting it to use in response, they were first. And they're very much heavy, I think, early now.
Well, and the increase in fire activity has been a forcing function. So everyone is adopting the technology as they see what benefit it can be. And there's a huge need.
So we see these huge tankers, I don't think 747, but DC-10 maybe dropping retardant, and then helicopters dropping water. Do any of those operations happen at night?
No, they can't operate at night because of the obscuration of the mountains and the terrain and the smoke. And it's just, the technology isn't quite there to allow that to happen in a manned context. Department of Interior is specifically working with unmanned helicopters to do actual attack, what they call fire attack at night with water.
All right. So this is a great benefit to be able to find the hot spots, do all those types of things at fires.
Absolutely. And it will significantly reduce the cost of fighting the fire.
Okay. And then how about talking about a little bit your background, how you got, so former naval aviator.
Right.
Now you're not out there flying a drone.
No.
What's been your background as it comes to drone operations, and more specific what you're doing today?
Okay, so I mean, in brief, my introduction was via the military. I was a Harrier pilot and then went to do a tour as a Joint Tactical Air Controller with the infantry in Iraq. And I was getting a whole lot of
As infantrymen, we love you. So.
Amen, yes. Making it, letting you all see what you need to see. And we got video primarily to find roadside bombs, improvised explosive devices, and really saved a lot of lives just by preventing those things from hurting our soldiers and Marines. So I got a lot of video there. I ended up coming back and working for a Boeing subsidiary In Situ that flies the Scan Eagle. And
Scan Eagle is a drone.
It is.
It's not a Predator, one of these attack aircraft, and it's not one of these smaller quadcopters.
Correct. It's not a hobby drone, and it's not the big ones. It's not armed. It's about 10 pounds. Flies kind of like a small civil aircraft. Can stay up for many hours.
Has wings.
Has wings. Little airplane that can stay up, and great cameras.
Okay. And what's its payload on that?
Typically, it's either a dual payload of electro-optical and infrared, or you can fly other sensors that are great for mapping fires, et cetera, specific sensors that are made for that.
And what would the weight of the payload be?
The payloads run around 5 to 10 pounds at most, and the whole aircraft weighs about 55 pounds.
Okay, all right. And then, what are you doing? I mean, what's State Solutions do?
Right. So I was, again, fortunate to be involved in the first certification of unmanned systems with the FAA. And now I do that on my own with my affiliates and help people certify unmanned systems and get airspace approvals and help the industry mature and grow in that way.
Okay. And we talked about, I call you the FAA whisperer.
Right.
How do I get the FAA, how can we make this work together with what we want to do and do it legally?
Yeah, and that's it. The FAA is compelled. They are really actually eager to work on this and have made great progress in recent years. Their limitation is it's got to be safe and it's got to be integrated into the airspace as it stands today. Yeah. So they're not going to accommodate the drones in the different ways of doing business. The drones need to work their way into the national airspace system. So there'll be technology enhancements that allow that and achievements that allow that to happen.
It's almost like you're a people integrator between what the laws are, rules, and the equipment and what the user would like to try and achieve.
That's very accurate. We put together a concept of operations for them. That concept has hazards that it introduces to the airspace. We find ways to mitigate those hazards, and then we go into a process to certify to prevent those hazards from being the case.
All right. So earlier we talked about some about privacy, and we're actually halfway through the show.
Oh, great.
So for you folks at home, if you'd stay tuned, we have a message for you. But when we come back, we're going to talk about whether you can shoot a drone down with a shotgun if it's hovering over your backyard. Might not be the best idea. Stay tuned, and we'll ask Charlton that in the second half of our show.
So I've come up with a family emergency plan.
Great. What is it?
It's difficult to talk about, so I'm not telling you.
How will we know what to do?
You won't.
I'm so glad I won't have to remember anything.
And me too. Thanks for this, sweetie.
Talk to your kids about who to call, where to meet, what to pack. Visit ready.gov/kids for tips and information.
Hello, I'm Eric Holdeman, and welcome back. Today we're talking with Charlton Evans about drones and disaster response and recovery. And Charlton, we left off with the question, can you shoot a drone down using a shotgun if it's hovering over your backyard?
So while I'm sure that has been done, I would say that is a very bad idea on any day of the week. It is actually prohibited by federal law. And when an event occurs like that, it normally draws some attention, and the federal agencies that investigate those things have been known to prosecute for them. So the danger of shooting at any aircraft should be obvious. I understand people may be upset that there's a drone, but whether you hit the drone or not, that projectile that goes up comes down somewhere, and you don't want to be the one that created a bigger problem than a drone by shooting a firearm just up into the air without a backstop.
Yeah, and I've followed this. People have actually been killed by falling bullets.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, it does happen in hunting season, et cetera. So don't do that.
Okay.
Call if you think something is going wrong, call a local police officer and try to get the process going on preventing that from happening again.
Okay. They aren't happening today, but there's going to be drones out there. They may weigh 55 pounds, 25 pounds, 10 pounds, falling out of the sky. And what's the chance that they're just literally going to damage my roof, hurt a family member just by having a mechanical, electrical failure?
Right. No, I understand the concern. And the hobby drones, the smaller ones, are less reliable. Right? They're built-up toys, if you will. They're getting better. They're more reliable, better built, but they do still have mishaps. But the fact that they're so small mitigates the risk of them doing damage to either property or people on the ground. It can happen, especially if they're misused. And people really who are flying them commercially have to follow the rules under Part 107, which is a rule set that the FAA has published that tells you what you can and cannot do, where you can and cannot do it, and how to get a waiver if you want to do something outside that box. So there are rules in place, and if you follow the rules, the chances of anything going wrong are slim.
Okay, so I was in Costco a month or two ago, and I thought, oh, cool, they have a drone for sale, about $1,200, and it had a little video display on the control panel. So I said, you could see in real time that if I buy that, do I have to have a Part 107 license or explain that whole process?
Only if you want to use it commercially. So commercial aviation historically has been regulated because you don't want folks who do commercial aviation as a business to cut any corners, right? Okay. Because the purpose is to make money. And people who are trying to make money are sometimes inclined not to follow all the rules because it can become expensive. Yeah. So the rules are in place to prevent risk to people and on the ground and in the air. Part 107 defines how you can go use your drone commercially. Okay. If you're not going to use it commercially, the FAA asks that you register it, and there's an easy way to do that online. And once it's registered, then you can go use it as a hobby, wherever, as long as it's safe.
And it's not prohibited by local regulation.
If it is not. And there's again, the FAA enables knowledge about that through their Know Before You Fly program, which again, go online, look up Know Before You Fly at the FAA, and it tells you, there's actually a pamphlet in the drone box that you opened up, tells you how to get the information and gives you a sense of what's safe and what's not.
What about just collisions or this aspect? Even inexpensive drones, the $1,200, maybe that's not real cheap, but if they have a mechanical failure or thing, they can have auto land features in them. If they go beyond range, they're running out of battery, they'll return.
Come back to home, absolutely.
A lot of safety features being built in.
Much of which is autonomous, so that the operator is not actually having to fly the drone per se. He's telling it what to do, where to go, and the drone does the flying autonomously. So if the battery gets too low, the drone comes back on its own because it knows I need to get back to where I started. The
Before
pilot's
I run
not
out
bringing
of
me
juice.
there. Yeah.
Okay. So what about these drone operators, I guess commercially? Who do they coordinate with now and how?
Well, in the context of disaster, there are the local and state and federal agencies that coordinate disaster relief, right?
Yeah.
So typically, you have to engage with those agencies if a commercial entity wants to offer their services, and then become a part of the solution by integrating with the disaster response. And typically that means that if there's a big search and rescue effort going on, that you're not involved in that because of the system is not integrated with those other aircraft doing search and rescue. You can work on the periphery and provide benefit and provide data that disaster relief needs on infrastructure, flooding, fires, whatever, but you have to be integrated as part of the solution, not part of the problem. So you don't want to do it in an uncoordinated way.
Right. Just go out there. Well, we've seen aircraft operations shut down during daytime by hobbyists going out and flying in a fire zone.
Yeah, and I understand people want video imagery of that dramatic event, right? But if you do it in a way that inhibits air operations that are trying to put the fire out, you're really posing a risk not only to the pilots flying, but also whoever's in the path of that fire.
Drone operators, they have a height restriction.
Yes.
So how high can they go?
Typically up to 400 feet above ground level.
Yeah. And give me an idea what 400 feet is, if you have any idea.
A little bit over a football field, right? So.
Okay.
And it is hard to judge, but the systems do have mechanisms on them, so you can see how high you are. And some of them, in fact, limit it to 400 feet above your starting altitude.
You'd have to violate it in order to go above 400 feet.
Correct.
They have that feature.
Yeah, many of them do, yes.
Okay, and not a good idea to disable that.
No, because again, you're interacting with all the other aircraft in the airspace, whether you understand that that's happening or not, particularly closer to airports.
Okay. What are you seeing as far as commercial companies now getting into the business? You know, what are they doing and what type of inspections they do on their aircraft? Right. It's kind of we met at a drone conference in Moses Lake earlier this year. And so I don't get the association wrong. What's the name of the Washington, Oregon Association?
Oh, AUVSI is a national association, the Association for Unmanned Vehicles International.
Okay, and there is an Oregon Northwest chapter, Oregon, Washington.
There is. The Cascade chapter of AUVSI is very active, one of the most active chapters in the national organization, and has monthly meetings and puts on the get-togethers like we did there in Moses Lake.
Okay, and could the average citizen join?
Absolutely, yes. And we encourage public participation because it spreads the knowledge about the benefit that's occurring and how the technology is progressing and why you really don't need to be afraid of it.
And you know, when we were at that event, I was amazed there's a lot of companies there talking about what they were developing. I mean, mancopter type thing. Individual aircraft would carry a person. It'd be, I could use one for my commute.
Indeed,
I'll tell you that.
we all, right? Yes, that is a real and coming thing. So everything from the smaller payloads and the smaller systems to, like you say, an air taxi, if you will, or a flying car. There are multiple companies now that are coming forward with those solutions, and they're actually flying in places like Dubai, and you're going to see testing in Los Angeles and other places where urban mobility is a huge issue.
Yeah, and how would you compare where the United States is today with the testing and using of drones commercially and for government purposes compared to other areas of the world?
Well, we have caught up, I'd say, and we're getting to be leaps and bounds again in the tradition of American innovation.
Yes.
There are two programs in particular right now. One is the President's administration has sponsored a integration pilot program that couples public agencies with private corporations to go do things that need to be done to innovate drone integration. Also, NASA has come out with a cooperative agreement over a systems integration operation program that's just about to be granted, and you'll see a press release on that shortly, where again, bringing big industry players in to do something that is commercially viable to forward the innovation of systems in the national airspace.
Personally, I'm involved with Northeastern University out of Boston, the Global Resilience Institute, and you've heard a briefing on that, using drones to do post-earthquake damage assessments of infrastructure, in this case bridges, using the LiDAR technology you explained earlier in the program.
Yeah, so bridge inspections, road inspections, rail inspections, pipeline inspections,
Explain
power
what's
lines.
happening with the railroad inspection.
So railroad is really out ahead, and specifically Burlington Northern Santa Fe has a program that's very active with the FAA, and they've been doing inspections both in New Mexico and North Dakota along their rail that take people out of the rail environment. They get a whole bunch of data by overflying the rail and inspecting it. They've got huge stacks of inspection criteria to keep the rail safe for both cargo and people, and they're fulfilling some of those criteria by using the drones, and they fly down the track, up and out of the environment, over the track. They're not intrusive. They're not in other people's world.
They're right on their railroad
They're right on the
right-of-way.
railroad right away, and they're looking just at the track. And they've got data analytics that pull the imagery from the track, and they point out where there may be future failures. So it's a fantastic use of the technology.
And previously, this was all done by a human looking down,
Absolutely. And then
looking for loose bolts
or systems that they would run along the track with LiDAR and optics, et cetera, et cetera. But that puts a system on the track that prevents cargo from moving as well. So it's an increase in efficiency as well as an enhancement to system, overall system safety.
Yeah, and tracks are inspected, I want to say, I don't know if they call it high capacity, but very frequently.
Very, very
I don't know whether
frequently,
it's
yes.
weekly or...
There's massive stacks of criteria, and if they don't meet the inspection criteria, they want to exceed the inspection criteria, but if they don't meet the minimum inspection criteria for the federal requirements, then they get penalized.
Okay. Yeah, where are the next growth areas going to be? You mentioned cellular networks. Do you think, we talked about for emergencies, what about everyday use?
Routine use, yeah. I think in remote areas, you'll see that as a routine methodology, not only tethered but untethered. Once the beyond visual line of sight technology comes to bear, you'll instead of putting a guy in an airplane for hours and hours on end, put a drone out there way out in the boonies, and then when it gets tired, you swap it out with another one, and you've got a cell network that's very durable.
And wildland fires is a big issue because they happen in remote areas.
Absolutely, and that's growing. Department of Interior has been really spearheading that. They've got an aggressive program. They've got the biggest fleet. They've got the best, I think, relationship with the FAA in terms of progressing that. They've made great bounds. They've got the contracting mechanisms in work, so corporations are getting paid to do the work.
In a previous show, we talked about FirstNet. That's probably a couple of years ago, but that's a first responder network, and they were talking about how they're going to have mobile capability, and drones can be one of those.
Yes.
Okay. How about, real quick, delivery of critical medical supplies?
Right, so in the same vein as Amazon and some of the others are trying to deliver commercial consumer goods, particularly in very remote places in northern Africa, for example, drones are currently being used to deliver medical aid, be it blood for transfusions. That's one of the critical uses that actually a company called Zipline is doing, and they've got an up-and-going operation. But it's not just blood, it's medicines that are not available otherwise, and it can take days or weeks to get there if you try to go by land, and there isn't an airstrip to go to, and helicopters are prohibited or just not available. So it's a great way to do an inexpensive technology for a critical need.
I know I've seen about actually sending out an AED, automatic external defibrillator.
Absolutely. Yep.
In advance of the, a paramedic unit showing up.
Yes. Beating the first responders to the punch with a critical need. The same thing for life preservers offshore. That's
There was
today.
actually they were testing one out, and there was a rip current, and they rescued some boys in the surf.
When you think about it, it's almost, gee, why didn't I think of that kind of stuff? Where there's an easy application, the technology exists, and it's just a matter of applying it.
What are you always saying every time you speak, every time you meet with people? What's the one message you want them to take away from as they think about drones' use of these type of aircraft?
Yeah, it's honestly, it's trust and information. So the more information we get out to the public and internally, the FAA operates on trust. If you demonstrate to the FAA that you've got a trustworthy design system, then you get an approval. And it happens the same way with the public. If an organization wants to do a program publicly, then get out there, communicate with the public, tell them what you're doing, tell them how you're doing it, tell them why it's safe and effective and beneficial, and a lot of these issues go away.
Well, listen, your pay for being on the show with this lovely Disaster Zone coffee.
I will covet it, yes.
And I hope all your drone engagements are not disasters.
Thanks very much.
I won't ask if you ever punched out of a.
I have not. Nope.
of a
Never
perfectly
left an
viable-
aircraft unless it was on the ground.
Okay. Well, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you very much.
All right. And this brings us to the end of our show for today. Thanks for tuning in and learning more about what you and others can do to become better prepared for disasters. I think you've learned a lot about drones and drone operations and how they can be a beneficial element of our community, along with perhaps some negative aspects to it. But remember, if you're going to get prepared today, it's a good time to start, and why not start today? Have a good one, and we'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.